That old village had seen its share of brutal clashes, blood-soaked fights, swaggering men who swore they were untouchable, but no one ever imagined the most shocking moment in its history would begin with something as simple as a woman quietly walking down the street, a woman who looked far too defenseless to be there. What happened that day shattered reputations, silenced bullies, and turned into a legend people still whisper about. And before we go any further, stay with me until the end, because what happened after that confrontation was so intense, so unexpected, that even veterans of illegal fight pits froze where they stood. And even the oldest merchants, men who had seen everything, forgot how to breathe. So go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, it helps this story reach way more people. Now let's keep going, because what comes next hits even harder. The morning was hot and overcast when Morgan Steele stepped onto the village's main street. The light-colored stone floor reflected the faint glow of the sky, and the old houses framed the road with their wooden facades and hand-painted signs. Locals peeked out from their doors, watching the blonde woman in denim shorts and a red top walk alone, moving as if she owned the place, despite clearly being a stranger. She didn't belong there, and that was exactly why no one could look away. Some whispered she was lost, others assumed she was just an irresponsible tourist. But the sharpest eyes noticed something unsettling. She walked too calmly, with a confidence no outsider should have. A makeshift fighting ring had been set up in the center of the square, where underground matches were held to entertain locals and travelers. Standing on the red platform was Derek Iron Fist Hale, the bully who'd ruled that ring for years, tall, muscular, tattooed, carrying that posture only a man convinced he owned everything around him could have. That arena was his territory, and anyone who approached it without permission became a target. When Derek saw Morgan crossing the street toward him, he smirked, that arrogant smirk only born bullies know how to give. Crooked, condescending, punchable. And then he did what he always did. He pointed at her. The gesture rippled through the entire square like a warning. Heads turned, voices died. The ring, once just entertainment, became the stage for something much bigger. "Hey, Blondie!" Derek shouted, his voice echoing between the alley walls. "Lose your way to the mall, or are you looking for trouble?" Laughter erupted. A few men shook their heads, already predicting the outcome. Just another poor soul about to be humiliated by Derek Iron Fist. That was his specialty, his signature move. That's how he maintained his image of being untouchable. But Morgan didn't react. She didn't smile, didn't frown, didn't look embarrassed. She simply kept walking, steady steps, steady breathing, as if she hadn't heard a thing. That irritated Derek, and it intrigued the crowd. The second fighter in the ring, Liam Cho, turned his head to examine the woman. Liam wasn't a show-off. He was technical, quiet, disciplined, and yet something about her presence unsettled him. It wasn't beauty, it wasn't fragility, it was posture. The way she walked without fear. Her chin lifted, her breathing controlled. Not a hint of hesitation. It was the posture of someone who had faced danger many times and survived. Morgan moved closer to the ring, and the crowd parted around her like a silent corridor. No one wanted to stand in her way. Her presence alone changed the air. Even vendors who'd been arguing over prices stopped mid-sentence to watch. Derek slapped his own chest, laughing. "You want to come up here?" he taunted. "Feeling lucky, princess?" But what happened next made the entire village question reality. Morgan didn't answer. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just stepped onto the ring, just like that, direct, no asking, no hesitation, no looking back. The crowd's breath vanished at once. Silence crashed down. Derek froze. Liam narrowed his eyes. Something was very wrong, or very dangerous. Morgan slipped off her sandals, set her bare foot on the red mat, and raised one eyebrow, just one, as if silently asking, "That's it? That's all?" To many, the gesture meant nothing. To others, it was a warning. An old merchant whispered behind a group of young men. "That stance. She's no amateur." "What is she then?" someone asked. The old man swallowed hard. "She's trained, very trained." No one there knew that Morgan Steele was the kind of woman who vanished from official records, changed identities, and operated in missions that never reached the public. A silent specialist from California, embedded in operations involving infiltration, disguise, and rapid neutralization. Everything classified, everything denied, everything erased. And now, under the glow of paper lanterns, surrounded by ancient rooftops, standing before the most feared bully in the village, was the most dangerous person in the entire area. And Derek had just provoked the wrong woman. What happened in the next few seconds would be remembered for decades on that stone street, because in that ring, the bully had no idea what he had just awakened. The village of Longjing might have been small, tucked away between ancient mountains, but it was famous for something you wouldn't find on any map: its underground fighting arenas. Travelers came from all over to test their strength, their ego, and, most dangerously, their reputation. The stone streets were lined with colorful banners and hand-painted signs advertising tonics, herbs, handmade weapons, and, of course, bets. Among all those hidden arenas, one ring ruled the square. Old ropes, reinforced wood, and stories that blurred the line between legend and fear. Rumor had it that anyone who fell inside that ring rarely walked away with their pride still intact. And the reason for that was always the same. Derek Iron Fist Hale, the village bully. Tall, shredded, covered in tattoos, and with that expression that said the whole world owed him respect. Derek wasn't just strong, he had fans, followers, people who admired him simply because others feared him. He was a textbook social predator. Find someone weaker, crush them, no hesitation, no remorse. It was how he maintained control, and behind him, almost invisible in his shadow, stood Liam Cho, his training partner. Liam was the complete opposite, disciplined, quiet, analytical. He never mocked anyone, never laughed at Derek's taunts. In fact, most people believed the only reason Liam kept fighting beside him was because he needed the betting money to support his family. Morgan's arrival in Longjing had shaken every one of those characters, but no one seemed more troubled than Liam, because Liam saw something Derek, blind with arrogance, would never notice. That woman walked differently. It wasn't the walk of someone who cowers under unwanted stares. It wasn't the walk of a lost tourist. It wasn't the walk of someone who'd never seen real danger. It was the walk of a trained combatant, the way she balanced her weight between her legs. The alignment of her shoulders, the position of her hands, her steady, calculated breathing. Liam had experience enough to recognize patterns, and these patterns did not belong to street fighters. They belonged to restricted academies, tactical centers, military training grounds. But Morgan would never reveal that, because Morgan Steele carried a past nobody in that village could even begin to understand. She had lived in 3 different countries before turning 20. She spoke 5 languages. And beneath the appearance of an ordinary Western woman, with her simple clothes and striking beauty, there was a classified file locked inside government drawers that should never be opened. She had been trained to vanish, trained to infiltrate, trained to survive. And yet, here she was, in an illegal fighting ring, wearing denim shorts and a red top, facing a bully who had no idea who he was provoking. The villagers had their own stories too. Elderly shopkeepers who had witnessed far too many brawls, young men dreaming of one day stepping into the ring, travelers from distant provinces seeking quick thrills, and above them all, the mayor, a stern man who pretended he knew nothing about the fights, even though he watched from behind discreet windows. When Morgan stepped onto that ring, all those worlds collided. The bully used to being the star, the technical partner suspicious and alert, the entire village hungry for a show, and her, the unexpected element, People noticed details they'd never paid attention to before, the way she didn't look down while climbing the platform, how she didn't hesitate when meeting Derek's stare, how her bare feet immediately found stability on the red mat. Something was wrong here, or dangerously right, and while Derek kept smiling, convinced he'd found the perfect victim to humiliate in front of everyone. Liam watched in silence, sensing something was about to explode. He wasn't wrong. Morgan Steele wasn't there by accident, and the bully had no idea how big a mistake he'd just made. The heavy silence hanging over the square didn't last long. The moment Derek realized Morgan was actually standing inside the ring, that arrogant smirk crawled right back onto his face, wider, cockier, dripping with provocation. To him, this wasn't a threat. It was a perfect opportunity to show off in front of the crowd, and most importantly, to humiliate someone who dared ignore him. The adrenaline in the air felt almost solid. People pushed closer to the edges of the ring, treating the moment like a rare spectacle. Derek spread his arms wide, stomping hard enough on the mat to make the floor tremble. "So you're really gonna try?" he sneered, his voice thick with disdain. "This ain't a fashion runway, Blondie. This is where we separate the strong from the decoration." A few laughed, others swallowed hard, but Morgan didn't move. She didn't bow her head. She didn't guard up. She didn't flinch. Her expression was calm, too calm, neutral in a way that suggested her mind was running calculations no one in that square could begin to understand. Even her hands stayed loose at her sides, relaxed, unguarded. And that irritated Derek more than any insult ever could. He circled her like a predator marking territory. "If you kneel right now, I promise to go easy on you," he taunted, tilting his head, trying to provoke her, waiting for fear to surface. "But if you insist on standing there pretending to be tough, nobody's going to blame me when you hit the floor after the first punch." From a balcony above, an old fight enthusiast muttered, "She's not scared. That's the problem. She's not scared at all." Liam heard it and silently agreed. He knew the feeling of facing someone trained to shut down emotion. That kind of control wasn't learned in regular gyms. It was forged in places where hesitation meant death. Still, Morgan didn't move. She simply lifted her chin slightly, studying Derek the way a teacher studies a disobedient student. That tiny gesture ignited a spark of wounded pride in the bully, who stepped in quickly, stopping so close his chest nearly brushed her face. "Look at me," he growled, voice low and vicious. "Look close, because you're not going to forget who puts you on the ground today." Morgan raised her eyes slowly, and that look wasn't human. Or at least, it didn't feel like it. It was cold, empty, trained. It was the look of someone who had seen the worst the world had to offer, and who didn't consider Derek a threat. To her, he was nothing more than a variable. The crowd sensed it. People stepped back instinctively, as if their bodies knew something dangerous was about to happen. Derek tried to hold his pose, but the finger he'd been pointing at her trembled. "You think you're better than everybody here?" he barked, now less confident, but still clinging to the performance. "All right then, let's see it. Show me what you've got." At last, Morgan tilted her head slightly to the side, as if calculating the exact point where the fight would begin. Her blonde hair slid over her shoulders, catching the soft morning light, an almost ironic contrast to the lethal tension swirling around her. Then she breathed, the breath of someone ready, prepared, deadly. And in that instant, before a single strike was thrown, the entire village understood one thing. The bully was about to face something far beyond his comprehension, and Derek finally realized he had provoked the wrong woman. While the tension inside the ring kept rising, other stories were starting to move in the shadows of the square. Longjing wasn't just a backdrop for underground fights. It was a place where alliances shifted fast, where every glance carried meaning, and every gesture could be taken as a provocation, a threat, or a promise. The mere fact that Morgan stepped into the ring was already stirring layers of the village that had stayed quiet for months. On the right side of the square, beneath a faded green awning, a trio of gamblers watched her every move with unusual focus. They were infamous for influencing results, bribing newcomers, and manipulating local fighters. But today, they were restless. Morgan's presence shattered every formula they relied on. She didn't fit into any category: underdog, favorite, amateur, professional. She was unreadable, and that alone made all of them uneasy. "She didn't even flinch when Iron Fist yelled," one muttered, rolling a coin between his fingers. "That's not normal." "No, it's not," another replied, narrowing his eyes. "The last person who stepped into that ring with that kind of posture didn't end well." The undercurrent of illegal betting began to boil, and the uncertainty about Derek's fate was enough to pull in more money, more whispers, more tension from every corner of the village. Across the square, Liam Cho watched Morgan with growing intensity. He carried a past he never spoke about. Years spent training in a distant monastery, studying martial arts that valued mental balance as much as physical skill. He recognized patterns instantly. He recognized real combat posture. He recognized someone who could dismantle a stronger opponent with almost no effort, even if she looked delicate. But what disturbed him most wasn't her technique, it was her reason. Why would someone so highly trained be here? Why enter an underground ring? Why risk facing a bully whose reputation was built entirely on smoke and fear? Then something inside him, an old instinct, whispered a warning. Morgan wasn't just a fighter. She had a purpose, and that purpose was tied directly to the heart of Longjing. While Liam struggled to piece the puzzle together, another group whispered in the narrow alleys. 3 hooded men, figures known for acting when no one was watching, had been following Morgan since the moment she entered the village. They weren't here for sport. They weren't here out of curiosity. They recognized her from somewhere else, from another context, another life. "She's really here," one murmured. "The hunt's over." "Do we notify the superior?" the second asked. "Not yet. Let's see how she behaves first." They knew exactly who Morgan was. They knew her training. They knew the secret operations she had taken part in. And they knew that no disguise, no simple clothing, no calm expression could change the fact that she was a machine trained to survive and eliminate threats. This truth, however, belonged only to them for now. The rest of the square saw Morgan as a pretty out-of-place woman. Derek saw her as an opportunity to humiliate someone new. But those 3 saw her exactly as she was, a living weapon. Back at the ring, the village mayor watched everything from the tall windows of his office. He had always allowed, theoretically without knowing, these underground fights to go on. They kept tourists, gamblers, and bullies preoccupied. But Morgan's presence was disrupting that balance. The village wasn't prepared for outside forces, especially forces as trained as hers. "Something's wrong," he muttered, "very wrong." And he was right. This wasn't just a fight. It wasn't just a challenge. It was the beginning of a collision between different worlds, hidden intentions, and stories long buried beneath silence. And while Derek still believed he had control, Liam, the gamblers, the mayor, and the hooded men all knew Morgan wasn't here to play games. Someone that trained never steps into a ring without a reason, and that reason was about to surface. The air felt heavier when Derek finally took his first step toward Morgan. He wasn't smiling anymore. Something in his face had shifted, not much, but enough to show something inside him had begun to sense danger. It was the kind of instinct any seasoned fighter should trust. But Derek, too proud for his own good, tried to ignore it. The crowd leaned in as one, breathless, hungry for the first move. And in that split second of silence, the impossible happened. Morgan changed her stance. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't something the untrained eye could even notice. But Liam saw it. The hooded men saw it. The incense merchant saw it. She slid her left foot back 3 centimeters, shifted her hip, relaxed her shoulders, partially, and lifted a single finger, her index finger, pointing at Derek as if saying, "You shouldn't have done that." The bully's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, trying to process what he was seeing. "Oh, you're gonna taunt me now?" he shouted, but his voice lacked the firmness from before. "Come on then! Show me all that courage!" He charged forward fast, trying to intimidate her with a sudden rush. Derek was known for explosive openings, shoves, grabs, wide swings meant to overwhelm and impress the crowd. But Morgan didn't step back. She didn't raise her guard. She didn't even blink. She just breathed. And that one detail, that tiny detail, was the turning point. Because when Derek reached for her shoulder, intending to shove her clean out of the ring, Morgan did something no one there was ready to witness. She simply vanished from the path of the strike. She didn't jump. She didn't roll. She didn't dodge in any dramatic way. She just tilted her body with surgical precision, letting his arm pass by her, missing her by millimeters in a motion so smooth it looked like choreography. The crowd released an involuntary "ooh." Liam froze. The hooded men exchanged sharp glances. The mayor gripped the window ledge with white knuckles. Derek, on the other hand, exploded with frustration. "So you think that makes you special?" he snarled, spinning to take another swing. "You're gonna see—" He lunged again, faster this time, aiming to grab her waist. But Morgan wasn't there anymore. The bully caught nothing but air. 2 movements later, she was on the opposite side of the ring, watching him with the calmness of someone observing an agitated animal. No exhaustion, no fear, no effort, just pure control. That was when Liam understood. "This isn't a fight," he whispered. "This is tactical training, advanced." Derek tried again, now using every ounce of strength he had. He swung a heavy lateral strike, one that could drop a strong man in seconds. But the moment his attack began, Morgan did something both simple and extraordinary. She touched his fist, just touched it, with 2 fingertips, a nearly invisible interruption, and Derek's body collapsed into imbalance, not from pain, not from injury, but from total loss of center. It was an ancient, rare technique, one that only a handful of masters knew, and even fewer could execute, shifting the opponent's center of gravity with minimal contact. Derek stumbled, wobbled, losing the alignment of his entire frame. The crowd had never seen a man that size lose stability so easily. And before he could recover, Morgan took her first real step, a short step, quick, silent, and placed her open hand against his chest. She didn't push, she didn't strike, she didn't force anything, she simply touched him. But that touch carried the weight of years of training. Derek fell flat on his back, hitting the floor with a thud that echoed through the square. The crowd went dead silent. Liam stepped forward instinctively. The gamblers stopped breathing. The hooded men exchanged tense looks. And Derek, the bully who thought he was untouchable, stared up at the sky, wide-eyed, trying to understand what had just happened. Morgan simply tilted her head and said softly enough for only him to hear, "Never provoke someone you can't read." The sentence spread through the silence like fire through dry straw, and in that moment, Longjing understood that everything had changed. This wasn't about strength anymore, it was about identity, about secrets, about real danger. It was about who Morgan Steele truly was, and no one, least of all Derek, was prepared to find out. The impact of Derek's body hitting the mat echoed through the square like a muted thunderclap. There was no blood, no screaming, no brutal display, yet the silence that followed was far more terrifying than any violent blow. The entire village was witnessing the impossible. The giant of Longjing, the bully who had never been dropped by anyone, was lying flat on his back, staring up at the sky as if the world had come to a halt for a single, humiliating second. The crowd didn't breathe. Liam didn't blink. The gamblers looked like they had swallowed their own tongues. And high up in his window, the mayor gripped the sill, realizing this wasn't just an accidental confrontation. It was the beginning of something that might turn the entire village upside down. Derek tried to get up, but his hand slipped against the mat. It wasn't pain. It was confusion, wounded pride, a mind desperately trying to explain what had just happened. He was strong, explosive, built on brute force. Yet that woman had dismantled his entire attack with a single touch. What did you do?" he asked, voice cracking, softer now, more human, stripped of arrogance. Morgan didn't answer right away. She stood still, calm as ever, watching him with those cold eyes that analyzed everything with surgical detachment. That calmness unsettled more than any strike could. Nothing about her fit the image of a lost tourist. Nothing about her made sense to Derek's world, yet everything made sense to someone who understood real combat. Before she spoke, the crowd began reacting. Whispers blew through the square like wind. She knocked Derek down. With one touch? Who is this woman? She's fought before, right? That's not normal. That's impossible. The old incense vendor, the same man who recognized her posture from the start, allowed himself a rare, almost proud smile. "I knew it," he murmured. "She's not from here. She's nothing like them." Liam finally stepped down from the corner of the ring, moving slowly. His expression was something neither the crowd, nor the gamblers, nor the mayor could fully read. It was a mixture of respect and fear. He knelt beside Derek, reaching out a hand, but Derek shoved his arm away. "I can do it," he growled, trying to salvage any scrap of dignity left. He pushed himself upright, struggling, using his knees for support. His face burned red, not from pain, but from shame. He heard the murmurs, saw the stunned faces, felt his carefully crafted reputation melting in front of everyone. And then he made the worst mistake he could make. "That was luck," he spat, glaring at Morgan with a reborn rage. "You just caught me off guard." The entire village felt it. That sentence was a signal. Derek still hadn't learned. He still couldn't accept that the woman in front of him was unlike anything he'd ever faced. And Morgan understood that too. She took 2 slow, deliberate steps forward. The crowd instinctively parted, giving her room. Her presence was no longer just commanding. It was almost intimidating, but in a quiet, elegant, razor-precise way. She stopped less than a meter from him and looked him straight in the eyes. No shouting, no taunting, no theatrics. And when she finally spoke, her voice cut through the air like a thin blade. "You were warned." The bullies swallowed hard. A simple phrase, but it ignited the entire square. Because in that moment, many finally understood. Morgan knew exactly what she was doing. She had never been lost, never been confused, never been uncertain. She had been in control from the start. Liam stepped aside, realizing this couldn't continue like just any other fight. There were risks now, too many secrets in the air. Something far bigger was happening beneath the surface. But before he could intervene, before Derek could regain any leverage, before anyone could take a breath, something happened at the edge of the village. The 3 hooded men appeared. They walked toward the square slowly, moving through the narrow street like shadows, crossing daylight without permission. And when they spotted Morgan in the ring, one of them pulled back his hood, revealing a long scar that ran straight down his face. He smiled. "Well, we finally found you, Morgan Steele." Her name rang through the square like a thunderclap no one was ready for, and Derek realized too late that his mistake had been far bigger than he ever imagined. When Morgan's name echoed through the square, something shifted in the air, like the world had just released a secret it had been holding back for far too long. It wasn't just the name of a stranger. It was a name some people there had heard whispered in forbidden stories, in rumors passed between soldiers, merchants, and men who dealt with dangerous information. Morgan Steele wasn't an ordinary name. It was a warning. Derek, breathless and stunned, looked at her differently now. For the first time since he'd ever stepped into a ring, he felt something he had never felt toward anyone: inferiority. He, the man who fed on the fear of others, was now the one scrambling to stay in control. His pride, once colossal, seemed to shrink with every passing second. But Morgan wasn't looking at Derek. Her focus stayed locked on the hooded men, as if they were the only ones capable of stirring anything real inside her. There was no fear, no surprise, only recognition, and maybe a hint of something deeper: exhaustion. Liam, sensing the situation had gone far beyond anything resembling a normal public confrontation, stepped forward. "Morgan," he said softly, almost respectfully, "do you know these men?" She drew a slow breath, never taking her eyes off the three. "I know the organization," she replied calmly, "and they know me better than they ever should have." The crowd stirred uneasily. This was no longer about fights, bullies, or bets. This was something larger, more dangerous, far more serious. The presence of the hooded men made it clear that this improvised ring had become the stage for a story no villager ever expected to witness. The leader of the hooded trio smiled again. "You thought you could disappear," he said. "But a weapon like you never really disappears." Morgan's face stayed composed, but inside something old awakened. Not fear, but resolve. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding anymore. Here, in this remote village where strangers judged her as fragile, she was reclaiming a piece of who she truly was. And that was her moment of growth. Accepting she no longer needed to flee. Accepting she didn't owe anyone apologies for her abilities. Accepting no one had the right to treat her like a victim because she had never been one. Derek, however, understood none of it. All he saw was his pride crushed, the crowd waiting for his reaction, and that same woman he had mocked minutes earlier being treated like someone powerful. The bully clenched his teeth. "So you are here for her?" he asked, bitterness dripping from every word. "Then she really is dangerous, huh?" The hooded leader glanced at Derek with complete disinterest, as if he were nothing more than background noise. Dangerous doesn't even begin to cover it. That indifference hit Derek harder than any punch. For the first time, he realized he wasn't the center of this conflict. He never had been. He was just a minor obstacle in the story of someone far bigger, and that truth cut deeper than his fall onto the mat. The entire village now looked at Morgan with new eyes. She wasn't just a pretty woman. She wasn't a tourist. She wasn't a victim. She was a survivor. Someone shaped by training none of them could comprehend. And above all, she was someone who had carried the weight of a secret for so long that she'd learned to live in silence. But now, that silence was ending. Morgan took a long breath and stepped toward the hooded men. Her posture wasn't confrontational, it was decisive. "This ends today," she said, voice steady. "Whatever reason brought you here, I won't run anymore." Liam looked at her like he was witnessing a rebirth. The crowd held its breath. Derek swallowed his shame. Morgan Steele wasn't just a trained woman. She was someone finally taking back control of her own story. And the road to the climax had just begun. The weight of the moment seemed to thicken the very air around the square. The lanterns swayed softly above the doorways, as if even the wind understood that something monumental was about to unfold. Morgan, now standing at the center of the ring, no longer looked like a visitor. She looked like someone who had belonged to that place all along, only now everyone could finally see who she truly was. The three hooded men stepped forward, still keeping a strategic distance, like predators studying the terrain before striking. Instinctively, the crowd parted, forming a silent corridor that guided the trio toward the heart of the square. Every footstep echoed across the stone ground, accompanied by tense glances and held breaths. Liam stayed close to the ring, eyes locked on Morgan. He didn't fully understand her past, but he understood something far more important. She wasn't running anymore. The fight approaching wasn't just physical, it was internal, spiritual, mental. A battle for identity, for freedom, for closure. Derek, meanwhile, struggled to process any of it. The bully, who once brimmed with confidence, now stood stunned, replaying the same questions over and over. How could an ordinary-looking woman drop him so easily? How did those strangers know her name? And most of all, what kind of person had he provoked? The answer was about to surface. The scarred, hooded man, the leader, finally broke the silence. "You know why we're here, Morgan," he said, his tone disturbingly calm. "And you know we're not leaving without you." She didn't step back, didn't flinch. "I'm not part of that anymore," she replied firmly. "You lost control of me the day I decided I wouldn't be anyone's weapon." The crowd exchanged confused looks. Weapon? For whom? For what? And why did she sound so certain? The leader tilted his head, almost like a teacher assessing a defiant student. "You must realize that isn't your decision to make. What you are never stopped existing." Morgan drew a deep breath, and in that moment, Liam saw something shift in her eyes. Not fear, not anger, resolution. The same unwavering resolve he'd seen when she avoided Derek's strikes, the same precision he'd noticed in her movements, silent, efficient, nearly invisible. The same resolve only someone trained in the depths of danger could carry. She stepped down from the ring with slow, measured strides. The crowd opened a path instantly, recognizing an authority in her presence equal to that of a commanding officer entering a battlefield. The hooded men parted as well, not out of respect, but out of necessity. She was the one setting the tempo. "What do you want from me?" she asked, stopping just a few steps from the trio. The leader let out a thin smile. "We want exactly what you've been hiding all these years. Your code, your mind, your training. You think the world forgot who you are, think you can live among ordinary people. You're a crafted weapon, Morgan, and weapons don't choose their destiny." The words fell across the square like invisible blades. Morgan, however, remained unshaken. "You're wrong," she said, her voice so cold even Derek flinched. "Weapons are made, people become, and I've become something you'll never control again." A ripple swept through the crowd. Fear, awe, and for the first time, someone rooting for her. The tension climbed until it felt almost physical. Liam stepped forward, ready to intervene if things spiraled out of control. The gamblers nervously backed away from the ring's edge. The mayor held his breath, knowing nothing could contain what was about to break loose. The hooded men exchanged glances. The decision was made. Conflict was inevitable. And Morgan, standing at the center of the square with the sun sinking behind the mountains, lifted her chin ever so slightly. The world seemed to hold its breath. The climax was only steps away, and no one, absolutely no one, could predict what would happen next. The golden light of the setting sun dipped behind the mountains of Longjing, stretching long shadows across the square and making the scene even more dramatic. Everyone standing in that charged silence felt the same thing in their bones. Something far greater than a simple fight was about to unfold. Morgan, surrounded by the three hooded men, looked as though she were exactly where she was meant to be, at the center of her own storm. The leader stepped forward, the scar on his face cutting through his expression like a battlefield mark. "You're coming with us," he declared, "or we'll have to force you." Force, a word that made several villagers step back even if they didn't fully understand what it meant. Liam instinctively raised his guard. Derek swallowed hard, tense. He finally understood that the world he thought he ruled was nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the one Morgan had been carrying on her shoulders. But she simply tilted her head slightly, studying the trio with the same lethal calm she'd shown in the ring. "You've forgotten who I am," Morgan said without raising her voice. "You forgot what you taught me, and you forgot I was trained never to be taken alive." The hooded men exchanged urgent looks. They remembered. They knew exactly what that meant. The next movement was fast. almost invisible. The second hooded man, the youngest and the most reckless, lunged first, thinking he could restrain her alone. He reached for her arm from behind, relying on brute strength. But before he even touched her, Morgan leaned forward, rotated her hip, and with a clean, effortless motion brought him to his knees using a simple, elegant, surgical takedown. The square erupted with gasps. Some people stumbled backward. Others whispered things that sounded like superstition. The attack didn't stop there. The third hooded man charged from above, trying to catch her with speed. Morgan spun on her own axis, letting his arm slice through empty air. Then she extended her forearm and nudged him, not with force, but with precision, throwing off his balance so perfectly he collapsed onto the makeshift mat. Derek watched, completely hypnotized. This wasn't a fight. It wasn't self-defense. It was dominance. It was someone trained to handle multiple opponents at once. He finally understood the depth of his mistake the moment he provoked her. The leader, now alone, moved in, not out of arrogance but desperation. "You're not running again, Morgan," he growled. "Not after everything." She took 2 calm steps to the side, slipping away from his attack with the fluidity of someone who saw movements before they happened. He tried to grab her shoulders, but she had already stepped back, positioning herself like someone whose body had been trained to react before the mind even questioned it. And then came the final move. Not meant to injure, not meant to destroy, but to end it. Morgan caught his wrist mid-air and with a smooth turn, sent his entire body off balance. He dropped to his knees on the stone ground, breathing hard, the scar on his face tightening with the realization of defeat. The square fell utterly silent. The wind stopped. Even the distant shop bell seemed to pause. Morgan leaned in, her face close to his, not with violence, but with firm, undeniable control. "You underestimated me, just like all of them did," she said, glancing briefly at Derek, who shivered. "But I don't live in your world anymore. I don't follow your orders, and I will never again let anyone decide who I'm supposed to be." The leader lowered his head. No more confrontation, no more arrogance, no more mission, only defeat. And there, in front of the entire village, one truth became impossible to deny. The bully mocked a beautiful woman, without knowing she was a trained killer. And in that climax, Morgan wasn't just defeating her enemies, she was defeating her past. When the hooded leader fell to his knees before Morgan, the entire square of Longjing stopped breathing. The villagers, once just curious spectators, now watched as witnesses to something far bigger than a simple confrontation. It felt like they were seeing a revelation. Truth finally surfacing after being buried for far too long. A soft breeze swept through the square, stirring Morgan's blonde hair, now glowing under the last streaks of sunlight. She drew in a long breath, letting the warm air fill her lungs. Her eyes traveled across the scene. The ring, the old houses, the stunned faces, Liam watching her with a mixture of respect and worry, and Derek, frozen, staring at her like a man who had just watched his entire understanding of the world collapse. The bully couldn't speak. His arrogance, so loud earlier that day, had completely evaporated. His breathing was heavy, not from exertion, but from the weight of realization settling over him. For the first time, Derek understood that everything he had built his life on, posturing, intimidation, performative strength, was meaningless compared to someone who never needed to raise her voice, never needed to threaten, never needed to prove anything. Someone who didn't respond out of pride, but only when she had no other choice. Morgan turned her face toward him. The silence between them wasn't tense. It was revealing. Derek tried to speak, but his voice cracked. I didn't know." She studied him for a moment, then delivered the sentence that unraveled everything he believed about himself. "And that's exactly why you lost." There was no humiliation in her tone, no mockery, no cruelty, just truth. And that truth hit Derek harder than any fall he'd ever taken. Across the ring, Liam let out a silent breath of relief. The immediate danger had passed. The two injured hooded men staggered up, helping their leader back to his feet. None of them dared look at Morgan for more than a moment. There was no fight left to give, no mission left to chase, only silent acknowledgement of defeat. The leader pulled his hood back into place, avoiding her eyes as he muttered, "This isn't over, but it's over for today." Morgan didn't respond. She simply watched them retreat through the narrow street, disappearing between the red lantern houses. The entire village remained frozen, tracking every disappearing step. When the trio finally vanished, a collective exhale swept across the square. The tension that had gripped everyone for so long slowly began to fade. Liam approached cautiously. "Are you all right?" he asked. Morgan looked at him, and for the first time that day, her eyes softened. "I am," she said, "for the first time in a long time." Derek lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze again. And instead of anger or vengeance, Morgan simply turned away and walked toward the main road, leaving behind the ring, the past, and the title that had started it all. The bully mocked a beautiful woman, never imagining she was a trained killer. And now, everyone in Longjing knew exactly who she was. When night finally fell over the village, the air still hummed with the energy of what had happened. Lanterns swayed gently, and in the narrow alleys, whispers repeated the same name, Morgan Steele. Some villagers claimed they'd seen a new light in her eyes as she left the square, like someone finally free of her own past. Derek remained sitting on the empty ring, staring at his hands, trying to understand the lesson he'd learned far too late. And as Longjing slowly returned to normal, one thing was undeniable: this story would never be forgotten. If this story kept you hooked from beginning to end, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps the channel reach even more people. And if you enjoy intense narratives filled with twists, unexpected characters, and psychological showdowns, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Share this video with someone who loves suspense-driven storytelling. What's coming in the next chapters might surprise you even more. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next part of this journey.